All right, welcome folks. This is the final webinar in this locally led forest stewardship series presented by NACD. Today's session is partnering with the U.S. Forest Service managing invasive species through Good Neighbor Authority. I'm Laura Meyer. I'm with KR Creative Strategies. We're supporting NACD in hosting this webinar series, and I'm joined by Colton Meyer, who's also with KR Creative. In a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Annika with NACD for a couple opening messages. But first, want to just go over some housekeeping. We ask that folks please stay on mute while we hear the presentation. And once the presentation wraps up, we'll have plenty of time for our question and answer period, where you can use the chat or just unmute yourself to ask questions of our speaker today. And also keep in mind that this session, along with the other two that were in this three-part series, will be available on NACD's YouTube channel at NACD Conserve. So if you're watching this and you feel like this could be helpful for others at your district, make sure you send them there to check out the recordings. So I'm going to turn it over now to Annika for a couple messages before we introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Laura. As Laura mentioned, I'm Annika McGurk with the National Association of Conservation Districts. I'm our forestry program manager. NACD is the National Membership Association for all the soil and water conservation districts, and our forestry program is about 2 decades in age at this point, through a number of cooperative agreements, competitive grants, and other funding sources, but most importantly in partnership with the Forest Service and a myriad of partners across the country. As Laura mentioned, this is the third in our series on really examining how districts are enabling cross-jurisdictional landscape scale conservation in a lot of instances through tools like Good Neighbor Authority, shared stewardship agreements. These are folks that are out on the ground using different tools and resources to get the work done with our partners. And so we're really excited to hear from our friends in Michigan today. So I'm going to kick it back to you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Annika. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Zach Peklo. He's the Invasive Species Program Coordinator at the North Country Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area in Michigan. His degree in Natural Resource Management from Grand Valley State University and his summer jobs performing invasive species control and habitat restoration have given him plenty of hands-on experience on this topic. Outside of work, Zach enjoys fishing and bird hunting with his dog, Burner. So thank you, Zach, for your time and presenting for us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And just for some housekeeping here, if I start to buffer, somebody let me know and I can turn my my view off here. Thank you for the intro, and I'll just jump right into it. So this is partnering with the U.S. Forest Service, managing invasive species through Good Neighbor Authority. There's my background, like it's already been said. This kind of lets you know that I'm not just some schmuck off the road, talking to you about partnering with the Forest Service. Been doing this work for a little while now, and has been with North Country CISMA since 2018. So, yeah. North Country CISMA is a 6-county cooperative invasive species management area in northern Michigan. We're that light blue in the northwest corner of the lower. I don't think my mouse will pop up here, but we cover Wexford, Missaukee, Lake, Mecosta, Osceola, and Mason counties. So a good portion of the northern lower peninsula. And anybody not familiar with the CISMAs, other terminology gets used throughout the U.S. There's PRISMs and CWMAs, ISNs, all the same concept, partnering with other organizations and agencies to get invasive species management done. So what is a CISMA? Kind of already just touched on that. We're primarily grant funded. We actually are a little bit odd. We have 2 grant fiduciaries. Both of them are conservation districts. So Mason Lake Conservation District, as well as Mecosta Conservation District, serve as our grant fiduciaries. It's kind of shaken out to be that one holds pretty much everything federal and the other one holds pretty much everything else that's state grants. And we have a steering committee that serves as kind of our oversight body with representatives from all of our 6 counties in a variety of different organizations, such as we do have a rep from the U.S. Forest Service, somebody from NRCS, as well as local colleges. So kind of a broad spectrum of representation on our steering committee. So jumping right into Good Neighbor Authority, I won't claim to be the ultimate expert on Good Neighbor Authority. I can kind of only speak to Good Neighbor Authority as it applies to us in Northern Michigan. I know it gets utilized a little bit differently in some other parts of the US and has kind of evolved over the years. But to kind of highlight that, the Good Neighbor Authority lets non-federal partners perform work on federal land. So in our case, this is the Michigan DNR helping to facilitate timber sales on national forest land. And then that revenue goes back into habitat restoration done on the forest. And that can be stream bank stuff, that can be invasive species management, quite a variety of different ways that this Good Neighbor Authority funding can be utilized. So why Good Neighbor Authority? It basically allows everybody to work on federal lands and increases the amount of work being done. So you're leveraging local assets to increase the amount of, invasive species management and basically more boots on the ground work, getting stuff on this federal land. And it helps to support our local timber industry and local jobs through this collaborative management. So here is a map of national forests. In Michigan, we have 4, the Manistee, the Huron, the Ottawa, and the Hiawatha. You can see for us, we're primarily working on the Manistee National Forest. They've since been combined, I believe, jurisdictionally. So it's the Manistee Huron National Forest now, but that's just kind of all semantics. With kind of those 2 maps there, should have just put them side by side, but 5 of our 6 counties contain quite a majority of national forest land. So allows us to have, this Good Neighbor Authority partnership. I know a lot of CISMAs in Southern Michigan, they don't get to do this cool work because they don't have national forest land. So kind of a bonus of being in Northern Michigan. So how GNA works with us, like I alluded to earlier, the DNR administers timber sales, and then that is funneled to local agencies to conduct conservation work. For us, Mason Lake Conservation District and the Michigan DNR enter into a GNA agreement. The funding is actually coming from the Michigan DNR. Treatment sites are decided in kind of conjunction with our U.S. Forest Service botanist, who serves as kind of the contact for the Forest Service. So me and her name's Carolyn Henney, hope to be back working with her again here soon. But we, before any work begins for the fiscal year, we sit down and hash out sites where she wants us to work and where we might have some different priorities, and it's meant to be kind of a group process with hashing out these sites. These are 1-year projects that operate on the fiscal year. So coming from a heavy fieldwork background, I operate on a field season basis in my head, but this is done on the fiscal year basis. So it's can make it a little bit weird for treating species that are done in the fall, like Phragmites. Typically, we have to wait until our next cycle of Good Neighbor Authority money kicks in, so that we can treat in October and November. For the CISMAs in Michigan that participate in the Good Neighbor Authority, we receive $25,000. and like I said earlier, the Conservation District is the project fiduciary. And I put kind of a sample budget of our 2026 fiscal year up there to kind of see the breakdown of salaries, travel, supplies, and then the indirect there for the Conservation District. Good Neighbor Authority money's pretty nice because it allows us, it is fairly consistent funding. We did have a leap year for COVID when they saw that not much spending was done, and that was primarily because we were all laid off. So that kind of made it look like CISMAs weren't using this money. So they pumped the brakes for 1 year and skipped Good Neighbor Authority for that year, but things should be back on once the federal government opens up. But that money allows a lot of stability in the technician and field crew leader positions. So as well as helping to cover the cost for a lot of other things like pesticide certifications, permits, training, and pollution insurance, all things that come with being a CISMA that does a lot of boots on the ground treatment. Kind of what my presentation touches on a little bit is how the wide variety of ways that we've used Good Neighbor Authority funds. Initially, when we started this work with the Forest Service, it was, hey, here's $25,000. We're hoping to get 30 acres of non-native invasive species treatments done on federal land. That's evolved over the years with us asking our Forest Service folks that, hey, can we use a little bit of this to survey some priority rivers or some priority areas along ORV trails, because we know that there's some invasive species out there, but we need to accurately survey and map that information so that we can strategically address it. So over the years, we've kind of created a swap out equation where, you know, hey, we're only going to treat 25 acres of invasive species this year, and we're going to survey, you know, 200 acres of terrestrial, you know, land parcels. So for us, there is a little bit of flexibility in it. And Good Neighbor Authority is a great kind of gap filler between a lot of other projects. So it very much allows us some flexibility where in this example, we have a watershed organization that had a priority to conduct invasive species surveys along all of their riparian areas. And it was part of their watershed management plan and their strategic goals. So they had a little bit of money to kick in towards a collaborative project where we surveyed everything in that red circle with Good Neighbor Authority funding. And it was pretty heavy U.S. Forest Service ownership throughout that section. And that's why we were able to justify using Good Neighbor Authority money, because we're surveying back on the forest. There obviously was, you know, some private inholdings within there. And the watershed organization was able to fund everything to the east side of the federal land, and as well as the neighboring CISMA to our north was able to survey the downstream section. So kind of a cool way of piecing together some different funding, you know, from 3 different sources, getting an entire river surveyed for invasive species. Another interesting one is ORV trail survey and control. So if anybody's familiar with the Baldwin area, not much going on there beyond a lot of federal and state land and some great ORV trail riding. So one of the very popular ORV trails is called Little O. Kind of crudely looks like an O, big circle, part of a much broader trail network in the county and in northern Michigan. And in that section circled in green is roughly about 300 acres of garlic mustard. The primary concern was addressing garlic mustard infestations along the trail so that ORV riders did not continue to spread it to other segments that were uninfested. So a lot of control work was spent in that green section there. And then we were able to use GNA funds to survey the adjacent land to the trails to get kind of the information of, hey, where do we need to start hemming this garlic mustard infestation in? You know, where is it sparse? Because sparse infestations that are outliers are where you want to focus your work in the beginning. And so it basically allowed us to strategically address some of these ORV trails in our region. Another kind of collaborative example is Phragmites control at the Oxbow Chain of Lakes. Very remote kind of chain of lakes in Lake County again. You know, this map makes it look like it's a highly developed subdivision, but pretty remote, you know, heavily timbered around there and natural shoreline. So, you know, these aren't seawalls all the way around these lakes, pretty pristine lakes. The Lake Association was able to scrape together some money to work with us through our at-cost treatment program, which is separate from any of our grant-funded projects. Basically, our CISMA can function for hire, and landowners basically get billed the cost of treatment. So provides some of these you know, community partners and private property owners a very affordable way to manage their invasive species without it being cost prohibitive. So the Lake Association was able to get permission and map all of their Phragmites on the lakes and obtain permission from the individual private property owners. So we came in and addressed all the Phragmites and then used Good Neighbor Authority funding to address two populations that were on federal land that had you know, shoreline ownership on these lakes. So makes everybody happy, makes the Forest Service happy that, you know, we're addressing Phragmites, you know, collaboratively with all of these partners. And then it really makes the Lake Association happy because we serve as that kind of middleman, you know, already having relationships with the Forest Service. A lot easier for us to deal with the Forest Service than an individual lakefront property owner, because that individual property owner is not going to get permission to conduct an herbicide treatment on federal land. This map just kind of goes to highlight how great the Lake Association did collaborating with us. They had their parcel ownership map, and then they were able to use some GIS programs and get out there and survey the lake by kayak. So all of those little red squares, they actually counted Phragmites stalks down to the individual number. So I knew what to expect when sending staff out there that, you know, hey, you're going to a property that has, you know, 8 Phragmites stalks. So a very cool way that we collaborated with both the Forest Service and the Lake Association. Hemlock woolly adelgid is a pretty big concern here on the west coast of the lower peninsula down here, primarily along the Lake Michigan shoreline. So hemlock woolly adelgid is an invasive insect that threatens eastern hemlock trees in Michigan. It ripped through the Appalachians and was kind of the poster child for forest pests and the impact that they can have. So hemlock woolly adelgid management is done through our conservation district, the Mason Lake Conservation District. They have a HWA treatment crew, and Good Neighbor Authority money is used to address HWA on federal lands where they are impacted. There's a map of the known extent of HWA in Michigan. As infestations get found to the north, efforts get kind of refocused back up there because they want to prevent the continued northward spread. And HWA is kind of odd for any folks that you know, aren't tuned into this forest pest. It's primarily found within 5 miles of the Lake Michigan shoreline, because Lake Michigan provides a moderating temperature effect for the pest, as well as that's where the majority of the hemlocks are found in that coastal dune ecosystem. Hemlocks are a pretty important part of that, that landscape. Garlic mustard at Mesick School Forest. So in Wexford County, we kind of have a cool example of collaboration again, where we have a school district that retains some of their school forest lands, and they actually have quite a good chunk of it. And adjacent to the school forest lands is quite a lot of U.S. Forest Service land. And invasive species never respect property boundaries. They don't, know that it's owned by somebody different. So there is quite an infestation that is shared between both the school district and the U.S. Forest Service. So we were able to have some local school kids come out from Mesick Elementary School. This might be middle school as well, to do garlic mustard pulling with our staff on the school forest property, and then our staff kind of did the heavy lifting on the federal property side. So I think I only have kind of my closing slide here of site selection, and this is kind of meant to be more of an opportunity for folks to ask questions about other aspects of GNA, but just wanted to touch on site selection. Like I mentioned, very, very flexible. Just because the U.S. Forest Service rep says, hey, I'd like you to address, XYZ species. There might be a million infestations of that within the CISMA, and it might not be a priority. I'm not gonna go out and address smooth brome just because it's something that our U.S. Forest Service would like us to work on. It's not just a list of, hey, here's where you need to go this year. And there's a lot of sites that we suggest to them, that might not be on their radar. So open discussion that's very, very flexible. And I believe my last slide here is just my contact info if any folks were wanting to reach out and ask any follow-up questions. So that is all I have. So I hopefully it was a decent place filler while all the federal folks are still furloughed.
Thank you, Zach. So folks, at this time, we'll open it up for a conversation with Zach. Feel free to either put your questions in the chat, or you can just come off mute and ask a question. We've already got our first question from Ellie. How might you suggest other conservation districts start exploring similar partnerships, or what advice would you give to a district interested in engaging in this type of partnership?
I think a lot of these projects, they don't just happen overnight. A lot of our collaboration with the Forest Service has been, steadily built over the years. So a good neighbor authority agreement isn't necessarily something that you're going to jump into, in your first conversation with a Forest Service employee. We have a member that serves on our steering committee for the CISMA. Most of this good neighbor authority work is done through CISMAs or CWMAs. And that's kind of the primary mechanism for funneling, this good neighbor authority money to districts. So the district serves as our fiduciary, and then, we represent a much broader area than, just one district. So I would just say kind of slowly start to plant the seeds, have conversations with them, invite them to your annual meetings, and then, good things just start happening. And there's a lot of other internal grant projects that our Forest Service staff apply for and funnel to us to do the boots on the ground work, because a lot of times they're constrained by hey, this staff member is only allowed to work 1,080 hours a year. As much as I'd like to have them do this work, the CISMA can play a role in getting some of that extra work done. So that was a long-winded reply, but hopefully it answers the question.
And I was wondering, I was wondering, Zach, about, you had some great examples of showing how GNA funding has helped complete a project or scale up a project where there's multiple partners involved or private and public land parcels involved. And you mentioned how the CISMA, or the conservation district, is that bridge a lot of times to kind of see that whole scale or reach of stream to completion by piecing together the GNA where it belongs. And I'm just wondering, like, how how well is that role of districts in the CISMA understood with your partners in Michigan? And what other ways have you been telling that story, like you have today, of that important role of districts operating in that way?
Yeah, and so I mean, SISMAs are an interesting animal to, say the least. There's not one example of like this is how it should be done. There's not two SISMAs. We have 22 SISMAs in Michigan. Neither, I might be vastly different in capacity for my neighboring SISMAs. None of us, we all have the same message, but there's no two that are a copycat. Some SISMAs don't have treatment staff members. Some have 10 or 15. So there's a lot of differences in capacity for that. And kind of the messaging, we periodically write articles in our local newspapers, kind of sharing information about this. We share this good work and examples of this good work through our quarterly e-newsletter. And then we have a big annual report that goes out to our partnering organizations. We have a partner list, I believe, we classify it as like working partners and then community partners. So community partners would just be, somebody in the public that's concerned about invasive species. But working partners might be like an individual city municipality. And they get invited every year to our annual meeting. We go and we present our annual report to them, and we just try to show face so that they can see the work that's being done.
That's great. Annika, I see you left a comment. Were you, but I think I also started talking at the same time you were about to.
No, you really touched on it. But one of the things that I really appreciated about your presentation today, Zach, is how, you've been working with Lake Association in one of your projects. You were able to enhance your outcomes there by sort of leveraging those local partners and what needed to happen, and then helping create those linkages. And I would say that's one of the reasons that we are so excited about the opportunities that exist in things like shared stewardship and good neighbor authority. But no, just kudos to you all and the work that you're doing. It's just really neat to see, especially the the youth engagement as well. Obviously, everybody loves pulling invasive species out, but we haven't seen as many examples where we've been able to utilize these agreements in sort of as layered of an approach as you've been able to locally. So I don't know if you have any additional thoughts about that, things that, have made that more successful or not. Because that is one big difference that I wanted to point out to you. It's a really dynamic partnership you've got going.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it hinges on, the interest and it's a two-way partnership. If the U.S. Forest Service staff member wasn't, keen on invasives or, didn't feel like the extra paperwork, it wouldn't work out too well. But luckily our local U.S. Forest Service staff that we work with, they see this as, like an amazing opportunity to get a lot of, priority work done that that the agency just doesn't have the capacity to do. So it's been great, and it's a great way, it's a very intelligently named program because, it's Good Neighbor Authority. It's not, these lake associations, they wouldn't necessarily be as keen to treat all their Phragmites if the Forest Service wasn't going to do something on their end. So it just makes everybody, a little bit more apt to care about it if it's getting dealt, on both sides of the property line.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Another question from the chat is herbicide ever necessary for garlic mustard removal, or do the required application licenses cause issues there?
So let's see if I can go back to the pictures. Yes, so that there is a monoculture of garlic mustard on the right. There's really not much that we're going to impact. Trilliums are, don't even have a chance to grow through that. This is a very, very high quality forest, and we adjust treatment methods accordingly. So typically with garlic mustard, we really like to do a post-frost foliar spray. So here in Michigan, our first frost that puts everything, all the natives to sleep for the season, at my house this year, that came August 28th. That was a real shocker for the garden. But typically it's mid-September, late September. And garlic mustard first year rosettes. So I guess I got to start with a little bit of a life cycle. The plants that you're seeing on the right are second year seed producing plants. They flower and go to seed in, May, June. And that's the second year of the plant. Typically, you start with a first year rosette, the kind of the violet shaped, low to the ground, and they will overwinter like that rosette, and they stay evergreen. You can brush away the snow and you will still see a viable garlic mustard plant, and they'll be able to tolerate a frost or two. So after we get our first killing frost of the season, we will go out to these high quality areas that have had everything native put to sleep, and we will spray the garlic mustard. Spraying the first year plants rapidly speeds up eradication, because next spring, in theory, we should not have any second year seed producing plants. There's always the need for, some hand pulling efforts, but herbicide in this case is extremely necessary, and you're not going to manage it effectively without it. I'm not pro herbicide or pro hand pull. I'm very much pro what works. If there was a way to, deal with infestations that's, hand pulling or mechanical control, that's always, the first option. But we're not scared to use herbicides when they're needed.
I'm just curious, from when you first started using GNA funding to today, has there been any lessons learned that you wish you would have known sooner, or that could be helpful for districts who are just getting started?
Our GNA work has pretty much gone off without any hiccups. The big lesson learned, it's weird operating on like the fiscal year time schedule with like how normally a treatment season works. We had gotten into the situation a couple years where we were using, we weren't staying within just 1 year. There was some carryover into the next year for, our previous GNA award. And what our Forest Service contact had said was, do everything you can to use it up within that year, because if you're not using the full amount, the folks that are higher up are saying, hey, do they not need that much? Can we award less? Doesn't seem like they're, utilizing everything. So that's the biggest lesson learned, is to, just make sure that you budget everything and you have your timeline set up where, you can use up that full 25,000 or whatever the award is.
Thank you. So another question from the chat, you mentioned sharing your successes in newspapers, newsletters, and public meetings. Have you used any other outreach methods to raise awareness of your services and share outcomes?
I mean, beyond the standard, social media and periodic postings like that, just a lot of partner meetings. We have one guy out of the Ludington area that always calls me a couple times a year looking for a radio interview. So just any opportunity there is to reach a different audience, we do. one of the things that we do when we send out treatment notices. So like all those folks on the lake there would have gotten a postcard saying, hey, here's the plan, you're adjacent to this, here's what's going on. We provide information about, like why we're actually doing it. That's not required by the state. The state's only saying, hey, you've got to tell them what the herbicide is, time, date of application. But because we're not just here as like a private contractor, we actually just want to educate the public. We take every opportunity we can. So the folks get a postcard that says why Phragmites is bad and where they can go to find more resources and, what is a CISMA. So just capitalizing on every opportunity you get to get your name out there.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Kind of similarly with the scale of the natural resource issues you're addressing, it also, when you're in a focused area like that, you have the opportunity to really saturate an entire neighborhood with knowledge about the natural resource issues and about the role of the CISMA. That's great.
And one of the things those kids are holding up there in that picture, it's actually a book produced by I believe they're a Prism. I think that's Pennsylvania. Yeah, I believe the book came out of Pennsylvania. It's called Tucker the Turtle, the pest that girdled the home of Tucker the Turtle. So those kids might be a little bit older than the age demographic of the book, but actually it's a very advanced book. If anybody, ever gets curious, order one. It's a great opportunity for reading to kids at a local library. Talks all about, like why kudzu's bad, why bittersweet, and why stiltgrass are bad. So all those kids got sent home with educational books. So because the thought is, they're going to go home, they're going to talk to their parents. The parents are going to see, a page in that book and be like, holy crap, I got that thing in my backyard.
I love that. I need to find that book. Any other questions or comments for Zach? All right. Well, thank you again, Zach. It was a great presentation. And again, folks, send folks over to NACD's YouTube channel to check out this and other webinars in the series. It's at NACD Conserve. Zach has his contact information on the screen there. And yeah, thank you so much, Zach. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great day.